The night that changed everything, a CEO's wake-up call to true leadership. It was late at night. In the vast and silent office, Daniel Carter, the CEO of a leading food service corporation, leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the computer screen. Over the years, he had read thousands of employee requests, leave applications, shift adjustments, payroll inquiries, but this time, one request made him pause. Can I take home the leftover food after my shift? A simple question, yet it made Daniel frown. The sender was Emma Wilson, a young chef who had been with the company for over a year. No rule violations, no tardiness, no complaints from management. A model employee. And yet, why did she feel the need to formally ask for permission to take home a few leftover meals? Curious, but not one to be swayed easily by emotions, Daniel hesitated. As CEO, his job was to run the company, not get involved in employees' personal matters. But this time, something about it lingered in his mind. Slowly, he typed her name into the system. Her profile popped up, 25 years old, no emergency contacts, no spouse. That was unusual. His eyes flicked to the clock. 10:47 p.m. Emma's shift would end at 11. Without another thought, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out of his office. Tonight, he would find out the truth, and what he was about to discover would change everything. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Three small figures, children, rushed toward Emma, their tiny arms wrapping around her as she crouched down to embrace them. Even from this distance, he could see the exhaustion in her posture melt away, replaced by something softer. Love. Relief. The dim yellow light inside the old truck flickered, casting long shadows against the cracked pavement. Emma pulled the brown paper bag from her backpack and handed it to the children. Their faces lit up with excitement as they eagerly peeked inside. Food. Leftover food from the restaurant. Daniel felt something heavy settle in his chest. This wasn't just about Emma. She wasn't just a young woman trying to take home extra food for herself. She was trying to feed these children. He didn't know if they were her siblings, her cousins, or if she had simply taken them in. But one thing was clear. Emma was their provider, their protector. And despite working tirelessly for his company, she still didn't earn enough for a real home, for stability, for security. Daniel had spent his career making decisions based on numbers, efficiency, and policies. But at this moment, none of that seemed to matter. He had followed her out of curiosity. Now, he was walking away with something more, a responsibility, and for the first time in years, Daniel Carter, the CEO who had built an empire, felt like he had truly failed someone. Daniel opened his eyes, his breath slow and controlled, but the storm inside him was anything but calm. He watched as Emma gently urged the children to slow down, reminding them to chew properly. She wiped a smudge of sauce from the youngest child's cheek, her movements tender and practiced, like someone who had done 1,000 times before. And yet, she still wasn't eating. Daniel had seen enough. With a sharp exhale, he reached for the car door handle, intent on stepping out. He wasn't sure what he would say or do, but the overwhelming weight of what he had just witnessed left him with no choice. But before he could move, something else caught his attention. Emma suddenly stiffened. She glanced toward the entrance of the alley, her entire body tensing as if preparing for something. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by something cold and wary. Daniel followed her gaze. A man had appeared at the far end of the street, standing under a flickering street lamp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and even from a distance, there was something about his presence that made the hairs on the back of Daniel's neck rise. His stance was casual, but there was a sharpness in his gaze as he looked toward the truck, toward Emma and the children. Emma quickly stood up, blocking the view of the little ones. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. The man took a step forward. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He didn't know who this man was, but the way Emma reacted told him everything. She was afraid. And that meant one thing. This wasn't just about poverty. This was about survival, and whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be good. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment, forcing himself to process everything. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, none of it belonged to him. But he felt it. And for the first time in years, it mattered more than profits, more than balance sheets, more than the bottom line. His gaze returned to Emma, watching as she gently nudged the youngest child to eat a little slower, smoothing down the girl's tangled hair with a tenderness that made his chest ache. He had spent decades perfecting a company that thrived in the food industry. And yet one of his own employees was starving. One of his people was lying to a child just to protect him from guilt. Daniel exhaled sharply and pulled out his phone. With steady fingers, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. The call rang twice before a groggy voice answered. "Mr. Carter, it's nearly 1 in the morning." "I don't care," Daniel cut in, his tone firm but calm. "I need you to schedule a meeting first thing tomorrow. Executive team, full attendance, no exceptions." There was a pause. "May I ask what this is about, sir?" Daniel glanced back at the old truck, at Emma, at the children she was fighting so hard to protect. His jaw tightened. "Everything," he said. "It's about everything." Daniel sat back in his seat, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. The night was silent, but his mind was anything but. He had spent his career making choices, expansion plans, budget cuts, efficiency improvements. Every decision had been calculated, precise, driven by data. But tonight, none of those choices mattered. None of them had ever felt as urgent as this. For the first time, Daniel wasn't thinking about quarterly profits. He wasn't thinking about shareholders or market trends. He was thinking about Emma, about the children curled up inside that freezing truck, about a young woman who worked tirelessly, who gave everything she had and still had nothing left for herself, and about how he had been blind to it for so long. The weight of that truth settled deep in his chest, but guilt wasn't enough. Feeling bad didn't change anything. Action did. Daniel took one last look at the dim light flickering from the truck's window. Then, without hesitation, he started the car. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new. A different kind of business, a different kind of leadership. Because this wasn't just about Emma. It was about every employee who had ever struggled in silence. And if he was going to build an empire, then damn it, he was going to build one where no one was left behind. That morning, Daniel's office was brighter than usual. The city was just waking up, but inside the conference room, change was already in motion. At exactly 7 a.m., every department head was present. Some still looked groggy, sipping on their first coffee of the day, but as soon as Daniel began speaking, the room fell into silence. "We have failed," he stated, his voice steady but firm, "and we need to fix it immediately." Then came the changes. Real, meaningful changes. No more wasted food. Leftover meals would no longer be discarded. Every employee would have access to a free meal after their shift. No need to ask. Fair wages. Salaries were adjusted to ensure that no one working full-time would have to struggle just to survive. An emergency relief fund. A safety net for employees facing crises, whether it was financial hardship or housing insecurity. And Emma, the young woman who had sacrificed her own meals to feed her family, received a salary that allowed her to finally leave that broken-down truck behind. The day she opened the envelope containing her raise, she cried. But this time, they weren't tears of exhaustion. They were tears of hope. How many more Emmas are out there? People who work tirelessly, always smiling, yet carrying silent burdens that no one sees. Daniel had once been one of those who didn't see, not because he was cruel, not because he didn't care, but because he never looked. And once he finally did, once he truly saw, he knew he could never turn away again. And what about you? Right now, someone around you might be struggling in silence. They may never ask for help, they may never say a word, but if you have the power to change something, anything, don't wait. Do something. Today. Right now.